this is one where it's a transition period and people are dealing with a lot of uncertainties when they go through this transition to retirement, specifically around the income changes, the tax structures, and then the different strategies that are available to them. We've covered a couple of those in our last few episodes, but we like this particular question because this came from an article that, and that's something our clients do often. They'll find an article, they'll read something, it piques their interest, and they're like, "Hey, what's your take on this? Could you give us some ideas and some thoughts?" So Cameron had gotten this question about this article, and basically the article summarized an idea around Roth conversions. And it can be one of those where you're wrestling with, should I take advantage of a Roth conversion? Will it benefit me? What will be the impact? And this article kind of turned it on its head a little bit with the headline. It said, "Why trying to quantify the value of Roth conversions is futile." And that came from the website Rethinking 65. So Cameron, when you first got this article, you read through it a little bit. What were some of the initial thoughts that you had? And then we'll dive in deeper.
Yeah, this is normal for someone new to retirement to be asking questions, to be seeing strategies online. Does that fit me? Is what my retired friend's doing? Does that fit me? And that's with retirement. It's the first time most people have done it. And a lot of decisions are on you now versus if you think to when you're in your working years, your income comes through your paycheck. Your health insurance likely also through your paycheck. Any kind of investment savings, automatic to the 401k. Well, now retirement, a lot of it's on you, which is often a great thing because you have more control, but it can be an overwhelming one. Just looking at the article, I was like, okay, there's another topic that you got to watch out for. There's another one that you got to watch out for. This one, if it impacts you or if it doesn't. So there's just a lot of moving pieces when you're getting into these retirement years and these strategies that are available to you.
Right. So that is a lot of different variables there that can impact the decisions you're making, specifically from a tax perspective, when you're dealing with those tough kind of few years in retirement of getting used to that transition. So that prompted this question for us that most retirees are dealing with, or people that are just getting ready to retire, is which retirement strategies are right for you? So let's walk through some of these retirement strategies the article presented, and then some that we deal with regularly with clients because we're building tax projections for clients each year, because each year could look a little bit different from an income perspective, depending on the desires and the goals that you have in that particular year. We don't just have the three-legged stool anymore, right, of Social Security, pension, and then some of the portfolio income. So it's a little more variable in the different types of accounts you can have. And then, of course, you don't have as much of those fixed incomes, right, and Social Security. So let's first talk about when to take the income, and then how does that look?
Right. And that's, when to take the income. I think that is made up of a lot of different strategies. And that's, to me, what typically is top of mind to those in the early retired years is, how do I make up for my paycheck that I no longer have? And they have the resources to do it. Now it's, what strategy do we use? And Chad mentioned the three-legged stool. You also got to consider, some of those, even if you have Social Security, pension, and your resources, they can start at different dates. And often you have the ability to choose when those certain things start. So when do you take Social Security or your pension, et cetera? So when you think about it, okay, when do I take the income? First off, think about, well, what do you already have? What's coming in automatically? And that could be a pension where, you say your state pension, or even a corporate company that you work for. That's going to make up a lot of your taxable income. Then you think about, okay, what else do I have in play? If you have a brokerage account, dividends each year, capital gains each year, some of that is within your control, but also other times you're inevitably going to have some, depending on what you're invested in. So you kind of get your baseline of where you're at. What's your baseline income in those retirement years? And then you start doing some of the strategies. So thinking about, one of the big ones, especially with this article, was Roth conversions. Roth conversions are a nice tool, but it's one that you're purposely bringing in an income to pay taxes. And in theory, it can work quite well, paying taxes at a lower rate now than you may be in the future when your required minimum distributions start. Currently that's at age 72. So what you can do is pay those lower rates now, but it may impact other areas of your financial life. And that's where this article flips it on its head, as Chad was saying, is you have to think about it. Okay, taxes touch every single aspect of my finances, and therefore your taxable income is going to impact things as well. So if you do a Roth conversion of $20,000, you're going to owe tax on that but did that impact other areas of your financial life? Potentially, did that increase a tax somewhere else or make something unfavorable somewhere else? Or is that going to come back to bite you further down the road? And that's what you got to start thinking about before you just go ahead and pull the trigger on a Roth conversion, because it's something that you're going to see in podcast articles as a nice tool for early retirees. But is it the right one for you?
Yeah, those Roth conversions, because you're dealing with what is my tax going to be today versus what is it going to be in the future. And not knowing what it's going to be in the future is where it causes that confusion, right? Because you're dealing with potentially higher tax brackets in the future compared to where you are right now. But it could be that it might stay the same or be a little lower. And that's the fear in making a Roth conversion today. And I think also people get confused about Roth conversions versus Roth contributions, right? And the Roth contribution is the more prevalent one that people hear about most often. It's one that you can put money in the account. You're limited to a certain amount. You're also limited by a certain income amount. Whereas a Roth conversion is money moving from IRA or 401k likely, and there's no income limit to it, right? You could convert as much as you want, but it's going to be, it could be quite pricey from a tax perspective, and you got to find ways to pay that tax. So talk a little bit about that, and then maybe some of those other income levels that you have to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is if you do a sizable Roth conversion, ideally, you're covering that tax through other means. So cash you have at the bank or your brokerage account, you're covering that tax. And you're paying that lower tax now and hoping for increased returns, having an after tax in the Roth IRA now. But you got to come up and pay those taxes somehow. So, you could have $1.5 million all in a 401k and $2,000 at the bank. It's hard to do a Roth conversion when you can't cover the tax due. So, some things to consider when looking at that. But also, when you're doing a Roth conversion, we talked about impacting other areas of your life. And that could be, one of the biggest ones is health insurance, particularly in those years leading up to Medicare. If you're on a health insurance and your premium is based on your income, if you purposely increase your income, does that have a negative impact on the premiums that you're going to, are your premiums going to rise because of that? So that's something you need to take into consideration. And even in those years very close to when you start doing Medicare and you start learning what your Medicare premium is going to be, then once again, Medicare premiums are based on levels of income. And if you increase your income purposefully too much because you think it's a good tax strategy, you may be in for a surprise when you're paying your Medicare premiums. So that's just something, health insurance is one of those, another nuance that, you're on your own now versus when you were with your employer. So it's another area where, retirees can make a decision that impacts things in the background that they may not have thought of.
Yeah, so you're dealing with multiple income ranges that you're trying to watch for, income levels, and for the IRMAA, right, that income related monthly adjustment amount for Medicare is some of those levels, and they change a little bit each year, but you're talking around 91,000 for an individual in this year and 182,000 for a married couple filing joint. If you're above that, that's when they start tacking on an extra amount to your Medicare premium. So that's something you want to watch for. And they look 2 years back on that, right? 2 years back on your income. So you got to prepare for that before you reach 65, a couple years before that, to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And that's, some of those income levels may seem high, but if you start thinking about, your personal situation, if you've got, you and a spouse each have a pension, potentially one of you has already started taking Social Security, potentially you realized a lot of capital gains in your brokerage account, that income starts creeping up pretty quickly. So it's something to keep in mind when you're making those decisions.
Yes. And speaking of capital gains, there's a couple of different strategies that you can focus on there. Depending on where your income is, you could go one of two directions in a year to benefit you. So talk a little bit about how that can also impact a Roth conversion.
Right. And that's, primarily for those that have after-tax brokerage accounts where, you're potentially withdrawing from to cover expenses. You may need to sell stock at a gain. And that, of course, is going to be taxable. Now, those in some of the lower tax brackets, up to the 12% tax bracket or so, you're going to pay zero tax actually on those capital gains. So really, if you get towards the end of the year and you realize that you're in that 12% or under tax bracket, you may want to purposefully sell and incur those gains at 0% federal rate. and stay within that bracket. But of course, on the flip side, though, if you get above that range and you're higher tax bracket, then you're going to be taxed at 15% capital gain. So in those years, maybe we had a downturn in the market. Maybe it was thinking back to March 2020. If you were able to lock in some losses at that time through tax loss harvesting, then maybe you can use that to your advantage if you're in those higher tax bracket years. So it doesn't always come up, but when it does, you can take advantage of that.
Yeah, and people sometimes will not want to sell a certain investment when it's down, right? Because that there's a fear that is kind of connected to that. So one way we think about that is you could always buy a similar investment that is investing in similar things to what you are selling, and then you have that advantage of a capital loss there that you could use against income, and that could potentially help you stay below a certain income limit, right? Mm-hmm. Also, related to the health insurance, we kind of missed one savings opportunity there. If you do have a high deductible plan pre-Medicare, many people take advantage of a health savings account, right?
Right. Yeah, and that lowers income as well. That's a great tax savings and tax efficient account to use.
Yep. And so, yeah, right. Because it's the only triple tax advantage account. We've talked about that many times on the show and have some articles on our website you can check out at financialsymmetry.com. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, we also have a chart that we're going to be referencing a couple times here. And it kind of captures what we've called the retirement tax window. At really age 55 to 72, you have a lot of different opportunities. And as we're building out these plans, you're dealing with a complex, different amount of options, and that takes analysis. But it's good to have a one pager that can give you somewhat of a 30,000 foot view of the ages that you might want to look out for some of these things, and that's what that could do for you. So you could check that out in the show notes of this episode.
Yeah, and I got the question the other day from a client about Social Security, and they're a highly regarded friend of theirs, an intelligent individual, started taking Social Security at 62 and says that's what everybody should do. You should go ahead and take it. And so the client says, well, what about me? What should I do? Should I take it at 62 as well? And that's where, these strategies and decisions, you can read about or hear about, but you've got to go at it from what your personal situation looks like. Because I'm looking at this client, I'm looking at their financial plan, and I'm saying, hey, you're in great shape to delay it to age 70. You've got other resources, you've got other income items coming in throughout the year that you can do that. Maybe he wasn't able to. So the Social Security, you can delay it and get the 8% increase each year. But then you get into some of the, when you take it and what does that mean to your tax return? What does that mean to your tax return because of the other taxable items you already have? Does that now make your Social Security income taxable? So there's certain thresholds that if you reach that, your Social Security income now becomes taxable. I believe it's up to 85% of Social Security can be taxable because of that. So if you start taking that early, it's going to limit your ability to do a Roth conversion, for example, where if you delay your Social Security longer, that window that we keep referencing opens up wider, and you have more opportunities to take Roth conversions. So that's something to consider with Social Security is what's the tax impact of that going to be? How much of that Social Security is actually going to hit my wallet?
Yes, and one of the articles we referenced there in previous episode was 101, Solving the Social Security Tax Bubble Mystery. So you can check that post out if you want to learn a little bit more about the specifics around how those tax brackets bubble at certain periods of time. So yeah, and another area that it came up just today for me in this financial planning scenario management, and a way that you can control income potentially right when you're retiring and the year you're retiring, is if you're charitably inclined. So that's not everybody, but that does include these potential advantages of donating more to charity in a certain year when you're having a higher income year, right? That could bring you beneath certain income levels to where you're not facing that income related monthly adjustment amount when you're 63, right? If you're retiring early, that you would be looking at when you turn 65. There's that donor advised fund option. Maybe you don't know the charities you want to contribute to yet. That donor advised fund can be an option for you to maximize a charitable deduction in a certain year. And then you can decide later which charities you want to give it to, and it can grow tax-free during that time frame. So there are some options there. Of course, later on down the road, you'll see in our retirement tax window a QCD, which we've talked about in the last few episodes, so the qualified charitable distribution as a portion of that required minimum distribution to lower income as well. So many times there's tools that come out in these different tax legislations from time to time that allow you to take a little more advantage of certain things. And that's why we kind of inventory most of this stuff in visuals for you to look at, whether it be just a one pager on all the different tax strategies that we consider for clients. But you want to be aware of those things and the abilities that you have to correct certain things. If, for example, you had a life-changing event, right? There are ways that you might be able to go back and appeal a certain Medicare increase on that premium. We did an episode on that, episode 104, how an IRMA appeal can save you thousands of dollars in Medicare premiums. So that might be an area, if you're already retired and already on Medicare and you're a listener, that's something you could check out. So, of course, many options and tools. Cameron, any more that you can think of there that you wanted to cover before we go into that progress principle?
A progress principle, I mean, really, it's when you're making these decisions in retirement, there's so many of them that, we've hinted on quite a few today, but there's more. And you're making a decision that not only that, well, really, it's one that's going to benefit you for the life of your financial plan, for potentially even the next generation, if that's a part of your financial plan. But each decision, you're not necessarily just looking to pay as little tax as possible in one particular year. You're looking at more over a life of your whole life. You want to pay as little as tax possible over your whole life. And sometimes that may be, it makes you want to pay more tax this year because you're going to pay less in the future, or that you're going to pay tax now at a lower rate, and your beneficiaries are going to inherit it later on down the road in a better situation. So you start thinking about, okay, well, if I do this Roth conversion now, who benefits from this Roth IRA in the future? Is it myself? Is it my kids? Whatever it may be. So to sum that up, just make decisions with the long-term in mind versus just the short-term, just what's going on in this particular year.
That is our goal with this show, is to help you and make you aware of opportunities out there that you may have missed, because there's so many to consider when you're making these decisions that you want to take advantage of, that can help you ultimately live a more enjoyable and fulfilled life. Because we hate to see when clients come in later in life and there's been opportunities along the way that they could have taken advantage of if they might have just had a little bit of hand holding there to find out. And odds are, if you're listening to a financial planning podcast, we often say this, you might have heard of many of these before, but implementing them, I've ran across a term the other day I really enjoyed called return on hassle, right? There is a return on hassle that you have to consider, as well as the return on investment for anything you're looking at that is going to require your time, your interest, and your talent. So just something else to consider there as you're thinking about these financial planning opportunities. And thanks for that question. We enjoy going through that with our clients and providing, and of course we were able to provide a little more specific advice to this particular client, right? Because we know their situation, but we wanted to at least give you the best advice we could from the, let's go 10,000 foot view on that one. It's a little deeper than the 30,000 foot view I was talking about earlier, right? Because we gave you some tools that you could consider, but as always, it's much better if we can understand your specific situation to give you that advice. But I love Cameron's progress principle there. Think long-term. And the best way to do that is by completing a financial plan. So you can see year by year what these things may look like and how it could compare, because we're making assumptions, but that we're making realistic assumptions of what might occur over 30, 40-year time frame if you are fortunate to live till 100. I think we can say fortunate to live to 100 in this scenario, right?
Yes.
With medical advances that we're having and all. Thank you. So reach out with questions. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us today. You can go back and check out many of our other episodes, 160 plus. We also have videos on our YouTube channel you can check out with many different show topics along the way, many focused on retirement, but some on other topics for some younger investors and maybe your children if they're not listening yet and you want to get them interested in it. And as always, you can check out all of our information at financialsymmetry.com. We've been blogging there since 2007, I think. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again in 2 weeks.